Amanda Carter stood at the observation window of Harmony Point Station, watching the alien ship approach. The massive vessel gleamed like polished obsidian against the backdrop of stars. Her heart beat faster as she thought about all the new discoveries awaiting her. As the station's leading xenobiologist, she would be one of the first humans to study the Zarkax up close. Quite a sight, isn't it? Keith Carter moved to stand beside his wife, his security uniform crisp and neat. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, and she leaned into his touch. After 12 years of marriage, they still found comfort in these small gestures. "They're so advanced, Keith. Look at how their ship moves. It's like it's dancing through space." Amanda brushed a strand of brown hair from her face, her eyes bright with excitement. Keith nodded, but his expression remained serious. "Just remember what we learned from the preliminary reports. They're a warrior culture. Pride means everything to them." The station's intercom crackled to life. "All senior staff report to the main docking bay. Zarkax vessel preparing to dock in 15 minutes. Amanda gathered her tablet and straightened her lab coat. Keith checked his sidearm. Standard procedure for security personnel. Even during diplomatic meetings, they walked together through the station's curved corridors, their footsteps echoing on the metal floor. Other staff members joined them as they approached the docking bay. Dr. Peter Wright, head of the diplomatic corps, hurried to catch up with them. "Amanda, Keith, good you're here. Remember, we need to make a good impression. This could change everything for humanity." The docking bay was massive, with high ceilings and bright lights that reflected off the polished floor. Security teams took their positions along the walls, trying to look both alert and non-threatening. Medical staff stood ready, though everyone hoped they wouldn't be needed. A soft hiss filled the air as the airlock cycled. Amanda held her breath. The inner doors slid open, and the Zarkax delegation stepped through. Supreme Commander Vexthor entered first. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, his scaled skin shifting between deep purple and midnight blue. Curved horns swept back from his head, decorated with metal bands that clinked softly as he moved. His 4 eyes scanned the room, and Amanda noticed how they lingered on the human security teams. Behind him came 6 other Zarkax, including his second-in-command, Krevel, who seemed more interested in studying the humans than intimidating them. "Welcome to Harmony Point," Dr. Wright said, stepping forward with his hands raised in the traditional Zarkax greeting. "We are honored by your presence." Vexthor's upper lip curled slightly, showing a glimpse of sharp teeth. "The honor is yours indeed, small one." His translator made his voice sound like grinding stones. "We have come to evaluate your species' worth." Amanda felt Keith tense beside her, but his face remained professional. She squeezed his hand quickly before stepping forward. "Supreme Commander, I'm Dr. Amanda Carter, Chief Xenobiologist. I look forward to learning about your people." All 4 of Vexthor's eyes fixed on her, a female. "Your species allows females in positions of authority." He turned to his companions, and they shared what sounded like laughter. "Our species values capability above all else," Amanda replied carefully, keeping her voice steady. "Gender doesn't determine one's worth." Vexthor's scales darkened, but before he could respond, Krevel spoke up. "Fascinating. Your culture must be very different from ours. Perhaps we could learn from each other. There is nothing these creatures could teach us." Vexthor snapped, but he allowed himself to be led toward the diplomatic quarter. As the delegation moved away, Keith stepped closer to Amanda. "I don't like how he looked at you." "He's just experiencing culture shock," Amanda said, but she couldn't shake off her unease. "They need time to adjust to our ways, just as we need to adjust to theirs." "Maybe," Keith replied, watching the aliens disappear around a corner. "But I've got a bad feeling about this. Promise me you'll be careful." Amanda nodded, but her mind was already racing with questions she wanted to ask the aliens. She didn't notice how Vexthor kept glancing back at her, his scales growing darker each time. The diplomatic dinner was in full swing in Harmony Point's main conference room. The space station's staff had transformed the usually plain room into something special. Soft lights glowed from floating orbs, and the stars visible through the large viewing window added to the ambience. The tables formed a large U-shape, with humans and Zarkax seated alternately to encourage interaction. Amanda sat between Keith and Krevel, while Supreme Commander Vexthor sat directly across from them. The alien commander had barely touched his food, spending more time watching the humans eat with what seemed like disgust. "Your species consumes dead flesh?" Vexthor asked, his scales rippling with dark colors. "Like common scavengers. We cook our food," Amanda explained patiently. "It's part of our evolutionary history. Actually, our ability to cook food helped our brains develop." "Silence," Vexthor cut her off. "I did not ask for a lesson from a female." Keith's hand tightened around his fork, but Amanda placed her hand on his arm. She had dealt with difficult people before. "My apologies, Supreme Commander. I simply thought you might be interested in the scientific aspects of human development." Krevel leaned forward, his scales showing lighter, more pleasant colors. "I would very much like to hear more, Dr. Carter. Our own species evolved from apex predators who... You speak too freely with these creatures, Krevel," Vexthor growled. The other Zarkax at the table lowered their heads, but Amanda noticed how some of them watched the exchange with interest. Dr. Wright tried to smooth things over from his place at the head of the table. "Perhaps we could discuss the trade opportunities between our species. We have many resources that could be valuable to the Zarkax Empire." "Resources?" Vexthor's laugh sounded like metal grinding. "Your primitive species barely understands space travel. What could you possibly offer us?" "Actually," Amanda spoke up again, unable to stay quiet, "humans have made remarkable progress in the last century. Our adaptability is one of our greatest strengths. We've already found solutions to problems that other species." The change happened in an instant. Vexthor's scales turned pitch black, and he stood up so quickly his chair fell backward. "You dare to suggest your species is superior?" His voice boomed through the room. Amanda remained calm, though her heart raced. "Not at all, Supreme Commander. I simply meant that each species has its own strengths." The strike came without warning. Vexthor's arm shot across the table, his scaled hand connecting with Amanda's face. The force knocked her from her chair, and she tasted blood in her mouth. The room went completely silent. Then Keith moved. He didn't shout. He didn't jump across the table. He simply stood up, slowly and deliberately. His face showed no emotion, but his eyes had changed. They were cold now, focused, like a predator sizing up its prey. "You hit my wife," Keith said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. The words seemed to drop into the silence like stones into a deep pool. Vexthor laughed, spreading his arms wide. "The female needed discipline. On our world, such insolence would be punished far more severely." Keith helped Amanda to her feet, his touch gentle as he checked her injury. A bruise was already forming on her cheek, and a small cut on her lip bulge. "This isn't your world," Keith said, still in that same quiet voice. He pressed a button on his wrist communicator. Throughout the room, security barriers sprang to life, creating containment fields around each section of the table. "What is this?" Vexthor demanded, his hand moving toward the weapon at his hip. "This," Keith said as armed security teams entered the room, "is me informing you that you just made the biggest mistake of your life." The Zarkax delegation burst into laughter, except for Krevel, who had gone very still. He alone seemed to understand that something had changed. "You dare threaten me?" Vexthor's voice rose. "I could crush you with one hand." "Supreme Commander," Krevel said urgently, "perhaps we should." "No," Keith cut him off. "Let him think that. It'll make the lesson more memorable." He turned to Dr. Wright. "Sir, please escort my wife to medical. Then contact Earth. They'll want to know about this." As Amanda left with Dr. Wright, she heard Keith's voice one more time. "Now, Supreme Commander, Let's discuss the consequences of your actions. The security teams moved with quiet efficiency around the conference room. No one spoke loudly. No one made any sudden moves. They just took their positions, weapons ready but pointed down. Keith stood in the same spot, his eyes never leaving Vexthor. The Supreme Commander looked around the room, his scales still dark with anger. "You think these toys frighten us?" he asked, pointing at the human weapons. "Our armor can resist energy weapons far more powerful than these." "I know," Keith replied calmly. He pulled out a chair and sat down, surprising everyone in the room. "I've read all the technical specifications of Zarkak's battle armor. Very impressive stuff." Confusion flickered across Vexthor's alien features. This wasn't how Prey was supposed to act. Where was the fear? The panic? The begging? "Sir," one of the security officers spoke up. "Earth Defense Command is on the line. They want to speak with you." Keith nodded but didn't take his eyes off Vexthor. "Put them through to my earpiece." He listened for a moment, then smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "Yes, sir. The situation is contained. Yes, Dr. Carter is receiving medical attention. No, sir, the Zarkaks haven't apologized yet." He paused. "Understood, sir. The fleet is already on its way." "Excellent." Creevil stepped forward, his scales shifting to pale yellow, a sign of anxiety in his species. "Perhaps we could discuss this matter diplomatically." Supreme Commander Vexthor acted hastily. "Silence," Vexthor roared. "I do not explain myself to lesser beings." He turned back to Keith. "You speak of a fleet. Our warships could destroy your entire planet." Keith leaned back in his chair. "You really don't understand what's happening to you." He looked around at the other Zarkaks. "None of you do. You think you're dealing with some primitive species that just learned to leave its planet." He stood up and walked closer to the containment field separating him from Vexthor. "Let me explain something about humans. We evolved as pack hunters. When something threatens one of us, it threatens all of us. When you struck my wife, you didn't just make an enemy of me. You made an enemy of every human in this sector." "Empty threats," Vexthor sneered, but some of his officers were looking less certain. "Right now," Keith continued, 15 human ships are moving into position around your vessel. Another 30 are on their way. You know why? Because humans take care of their own. We protect our families. And we're very, very good at dealing with bullies." A new voice crackled over the station's comm system. "Harmony Point. This is Captain Laura Martins of the battlecruiser Retribution. We have the Zarkak's vessel surrounded. Awaiting your orders, Chief Carter." Vexthor's scales paled slightly. "You would risk war over one female." "No," Keith said. "You would risk war because you thought you could hurt my wife and get away with it." He turned to address all the Zarkaks. "Your species prides itself on being warriors. That's fine. But you should know that humans, we're warriors too. We just don't feel the need to brag about it." He pressed another button on his wrist device, and a holographic display appeared in the center of the room. It showed the space around the station, where human ships had indeed surrounded the Zarkak's vessel. "Now," Keith said, "we're going to discuss appropriate compensation for assaulting a human citizen. Then we're going to talk about new diplomatic protocols. And you're going to listen. Because if you don't..." He let the sentence hang. "And if we refuse?" Vexthor asked, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "Then you'll learn why every spacefaring species that has tried to bully humanity is either our ally now or doesn't exist anymore." Keith's voice remained calm, but his eyes were still cold. "Your choice, Supreme Commander. What's it going to be?" The room fell silent again, as everyone waited for Vexthor's response. The mighty alien commander looked around at the human security teams, at the ships displayed in the hologram, and at Keith's unwavering stare. For the first time in his life, he began to wonder if perhaps he had made a serious mistake. In the medical bay of Harmony Point, Amanda sat on an examination table while the doctor treated her injured cheek. The cut on her lip had stopped bleeding, but the bruise was spreading. She could hear urgent voices in the hallway as station staff rushed back and forth. "How are you feeling?" Dr. Wright asked from the doorway. He looked worried, but there was anger in his eyes too. "I'm fine," Amanda said, "but I'm more concerned about what's happening out there." "Have you heard from Earth?" Before he could answer, Captain Laura Martinez walked into the medical bay. She wore the black and silver uniform of Earth's fleet, her boots making sharp sounds on the floor. "Dr. Carter, I'm glad to see you're okay. Earth is taking this very seriously." Amanda tried to sit up straighter. "Captain, please tell me we're not going to war over this." "That depends on the Zarkax," Laura said. She pulled up a holographic display showing more human ships arriving in the sector. "We've called in ships from 3 different battle groups. The Zarkax need to understand that attacking a human citizen has consequences." In the conference room, the situation was getting worse. 3 more Zarkax ships had dropped out of faster-than-light travel, taking up positions near their commander's vessel. They were bigger than the human ships, their weapons clearly visible on their dark hulls. "You see," Vexthor's confidence had returned. "Your fleet is nothing compared to ours. Now release us from these containment fields, or we will show you true power." Keith watched the new ships appear on his display. He didn't look worried. "Captain Martinez, are you seeing this?" "Affirmative, Chief Carter." Laura's voice came through clearly. "But they should look again at their long-range scanners. Show them." Keith pressed a button, and a holographic display zoomed out. Now everyone could see the dozens of human ships emerging from hidden positions behind moons and asteroids. They had been there all along, waiting. "Impossible," one of the Zarkax officers whispered. "How did we not detect them?" "Because we didn't want you to," Keith said simply. "Humans learned a long time ago that it's better to have weapons and not need them than to need weapons and not have them." Creevil stepped forward again. "Supreme Commander, please. The humans clearly prepared for any hostile action. Perhaps we should consider their terms." "Never." Vexthor slammed his fist against the containment field. "I will not bow to these primitives. Our empire has conquered hundreds of worlds." "And yet," Keith said, "you've never encountered humans before. Did you ever wonder why? Did you think it was luck?" He walked around the room slowly. "Every species that finds us has the same reaction. They see our short lives, our fragile bodies, our young civilization. They think we're weak. They don't understand that everything that makes us seem weak is exactly what makes us strong." The station's sensors began picking up energy readings from the Zarkax ships. They were powering up their weapons. "Last chance, Supreme Commander," Keith said. "You can either apologize and discuss proper compensation, or you can find out exactly how humans fight when someone threatens their family." Vexthor raised his hand to give the attack order, but another voice cut through the tension. "Stop this madness." It was Amanda. She stood in the doorway, her face bruised but her eyes fierce. "Supreme Commander, your pride isn't worth the lives of your crew. And Keith, we didn't build this station to start a war." The room fell silent. Even Vexthor seemed surprised by her return. "You show courage, female," he said finally, "even after I struck you." "My name is Dr. Carter," Amanda corrected him firmly. "And yes, I have courage. All humans do. The question is, do you have the courage to admit you were wrong?" The tension in the room grew thicker as everyone waited for Vexthor's response. Outside the station, human and Zarkax ships faced each other, weapons ready. The next few moments would determine whether this would end in peace or war. Vexthor stared at Amanda for a long moment, his scales shifting between dark and light colors as he struggled with his response. Finally, he turned away from her and faced Keith again. "Your female speaks of courage, but all I see is weakness," he growled. "You hide behind your ships and your containment fields. Face me in combat, if you dare." Keith shook his head slowly. "You still don't understand what you're dealing with, do you? This isn't about proving who's stronger." He walked closer to the containment field. Let me tell you a story about humans. I do not want to hear your stories. Vex Thor snapped, but Keith continued anyway. A long time ago, on Earth, humans were not the strongest creatures. We weren't the fastest. We didn't have sharp claws or powerful jaws. But we had something better. Keith's voice was calm, almost like he was giving a lecture. We had minds that could solve problems. We had hands that could make tools. And most importantly, we had each other. Captain Martinez's voice came over the comm system. Chief Carter, the Zarkax ships are still powering up weapons. Should we take action? Not yet, Captain, Keith replied. He never took his eyes off Vex Thor. The Supreme Commander needs to hear this. Amanda stepped closer, standing beside her husband. Despite her bruised face, she showed no fear. We studied your species before you arrived, she said. You evolved as solitary hunters. Each Zarkax had to prove themselves alone. But humans, we evolved as groups. When we hunted, Keith continued, we didn't do it alone. We worked together. We made plans. We used our brains more than our muscles. And we won. We hunted creatures bigger and stronger than ourselves, and we won. One of the younger Zarkax officers spoke up. But what does this have to do with now? Everything, Keith said, because we never lost that ability. When we face a stronger enemy, we don't try to match their strength. We think. We plan. We work together. He gestured to the holographic display showing the human fleet. Look at our ships. They're smaller than yours, but they're faster, more maneuverable, and they're crewed by humans who know how to work as a team. Crevel's scales had turned almost white. Supreme Commander, I believe he speaks truth. Look at how their ships are positioned. They're not just surrounding us. They're supporting each other. Each ship covers another's weak points. But Vex Thor wasn't listening. Enough talk, he roared. All ships, prepare tow. Detecting multiple new contacts, a human officer called out. 30 more ships just dropped out of FTL. The holographic display updated, showing even more human vessels arriving. They moved with precise coordination, taking up positions that somehow made their smaller numbers seem even more threatening. Like I said, Keith's voice was still calm. Humans take care of their own. When you hurt one of us, you face all of us. And we've had a very long time to practice fighting together. Amanda touched Keith's arm gently. Show them the other thing we're good at, she said softly. Keith nodded. We're also good at giving second chances. Supreme Commander, you have a choice. You can either accept that you made a mistake and work with us to fix it, or you can let your pride start a war. But if you choose war, he let the words hang in the air. You would lose everything. Crevel finished, speaking directly to Vex Thor. Supreme Commander, please, look at how they fight. Look at how they think. They're not primitive at all. They're just different from us. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Every Zarkax officer watched their commander, waiting to see if he would choose wisdom or pride. Outside the station, dozens of ships waited in perfect formation, ready for either peace or war. Vex Thor stood at the crossroads of a moment that would change everything, not just for him, but for the entire Zarkax Empire. The question was, had he learned enough about humans to make the right choice? Pride won. It always did with Vex Thor. He raised his hand and gave the command that would change everything. All ships, open fire. Warriors, break free and show these humans true strength. The Zarkax officers activated devices on their armor. The containment fields flickered as they tried to break through using their advanced technology. Vex Thor smiled, showing his sharp teeth. He thought victory would be quick. He was wrong. Keith pressed a button on his wrist controller. Activate Protocol Shield Breaker. Suddenly, all the Zarkax armor stopped working. Their devices sparked and went dark. The containment fields stayed strong. What? What is this trickery? Vex Thor roared. Remember when I said we studied your species? Keith's voice was still calm. We studied your technology too. We knew exactly how your armor worked before you ever arrived. Outside the station, the space battle had begun. The Zarkak ships fired their powerful weapons, but the human ships moved like dancers, slipping between the energy beams. They were smaller and faster, just as Keith had said. All ships, attack pattern Delta, Captain Martinez commanded over the communications system. The human fleet moved as one, like a flock of birds changing direction in the sky. Creevil watched the battle through the windows, his scales nearly white with fear. How are they doing this? Our weapons can't hit them. Because they're working together, Amanda explained, still standing beside Keith. Each ship knows exactly where the others will be. They've trained for this. The human ships began their counterattack. They didn't try to match the Zarkak ship's power. Instead, they fired precisely at weak points that bigger ships couldn't protect. Small, fast fighters slipped through gaps in the Zarkak's formation, hitting engines and weapon systems. Inside the conference room, Vexthor watched his mighty fleet struggle against the humans' coordinated assault. "Impossible," he whispered. "We are superior. We are stronger." "Strength isn't everything," Keith said. He turned to the security teams. "Show them." The human security officers moved with perfect coordination. Some aimed high, others low. Some watched the doors while others kept their eyes on the Zarkaks. They didn't need to speak. They all knew their roles. "Last chance, Supreme Commander," Keith offered. "Surrender now, and we can still fix this without anyone else getting hurt." Vexthor looked around wildly. His fleet was being taken apart piece by piece. His warriors were trapped. Everything he believed about humans had been wrong. But still, his pride wouldn't let him give up. With a roar of rage, he charged at the containment field, thinking he could break through with pure strength. The field sparked and crackled, then sent him flying backward. He crashed into a table, sending dishes and food everywhere. "Your fleet is disabled," Supreme Commander, Captain Martinez reported. Her voice was professional, showing no excitement or anger. "Your ship's engines and weapons are offline. Do you wish to continue this demonstration?" Vexthor tried to stand up, but his legs wobbled. He had never been defeated like this before. "How?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "How did you beat us so easily?" "Because you thought this would be easy," Keith explained. "You thought we were weak because we're different from you. But being different isn't the same as being weak." Amanda stepped forward. "You chose to attack us because your pride was hurt. We chose to prepare to defend ourselves because we understand that not everyone thinks the way we do. That's the real difference between our species." The Zarkak's commander looked at his defeated warriors, at his helpless fleet, and at the humans who had outthought and outfought him at every turn. For the first time in his life, Supreme Commander Vexthor began to understand what true strength looked like, and it looked nothing like what he had always believed. 1 week later, Amanda stood at the same observation window where she had first watched the Zarkak ship arrive. Her bruises had faded to yellow, and the cut on her lip was almost healed. The view outside was different now. Repair ships moved carefully around the damaged Zarkak's vessels, helping fix what the battle had broken. "Quite a change from last week," Keith said, walking up beside her. He handed her a cup of coffee, their morning routine unchanged despite everything that had happened. "They're learning," Amanda replied, watching the human repair crew direct a Zarkak's engineering team. "Look at them working together." Vexthor would hate it. The former Supreme Commander had been recalled by his Empire's leadership after they learned what happened. Creevil now led the Zarkak's delegation, and he proved to be much better at diplomacy. "Speaking of learning," Keith said, "the new diplomatic protocols you helped write are being sent to every human station and ship. No more accidents because of cultural misunderstandings." Amanda smiled. "And the Zarkaks are creating their own version. Creevil told me this morning that they're even allowing females to join their diplomatic corps now. Small steps, but it's progress." The station's intercom system came to life. Dr. Carter, please report to Conference Room 3. The Joint Science Team is ready for their meeting. That's my cue, Amanda said. She kissed Keith quickly and headed for the door. Try not to scare any more aliens today. Keith laughed. No promises, but they're a lot more polite now. In Conference Room 3, human and Zarkax scientists sat together, sharing information and ideas. The Zarkax still looked uncomfortable sitting so close to other species, but they were trying. That's what mattered. Dr. Carter, Creevil greeted her as she entered. We were just discussing your paper on comparative technobiology. Your insights into our species are impressive. Thank you, Amanda replied. And thank you for sharing your medical database with us. It's helping us understand your people better. Understanding, Creevil said thoughtfully, his scales showing peaceful blue colors. That's what we failed to do before. We thought strength was all that mattered. Captain Martinez joined them, now a regular visitor to the station. Strength matters, she said, taking the seat. But there are many kinds of strength. Working together, learning from each other, that's its own kind of power. The meeting continued, with humans and Zarkax sharing knowledge freely. On the screens around them, reports showed how their cooperation was spreading. Other alien species were watching, learning from what had happened at Harmony Point. Later that evening, Keith found Amanda in their quarters, reading reports on her tablet. Good news, he said. The last Zarkax warship is fully repaired. They'll be heading home tomorrow. Amanda looked up. Are they still angry about what happened? Some of them are, Keith admitted, but most of them understand now. Creevil told me something interesting today. He said that in all their history of conquest, we're the first species that beat them and then help them rebuild. That's what humans do, Amanda said. We fight if we have to, but we'd rather make friends. Keith sat down beside her. You know, when I saw him hit you, I wanted to tear him apart with my bare hands. I know. Amanda touched his hand gently. But you did something better. You showed them that humans are strong enough to win and wise enough to show mercy. Outside their window, stars twinkled in the darkness. Somewhere out there, the story of what happened at Harmony Point was spreading among the stars. The story of how a single punch led to understanding between two very different species. The story of how humans proved they could be both warriors and peacemakers. And if any other species thought about testing humanity's strength, they would remember the lesson the Zarkax learned. Never underestimate humans, and never, ever hurt someone they love.